Hello. Today we're talking about solving absolute values. So we learned before that an absolute value sign makes everything positive. So if I'm given the problem, the absolute value of -2, it makes it positive, and the answer is simply 2. Likewise, if I have a positive value already, and I take the absolute value of it, it stays positive, so the absolute value of 2 is still just a plain old 2. So there's two answers that each make equal 2. So if I'm given a question to solve, the absolute value of x has to equal 2, then there's always two values that it could be. On the one hand, x, we could put a 2 in here, and 2 would, absolute value of 2 equals 2. On the other hand, I could also put in a -2 in that spot for x, and the absolute value of a -2 equals 2. So there's two answers to solving these absolute value problems. The next thing that you'll probably want to know is that absolute values act like parentheses. So if the absolute values act like parentheses, then when you simplify them, you have to do the operations that are inside that absolute value before you actually start making things positive. So if they say simplify the absolute value of -6b, where b is 1.5, what you need to do is first put in the b. So b is, 1.5. Let's make that a little nicer. 1.5. We're multiplying these two together. So then you have to multiply them together before you can do anything with the positives or negatives. So a 6 times a 1.5 is a 9, and the negative sign's still there, and the absolute value signs are still there. Then, when there's no more operations inside there, then you can take the absolute value of that -9 and get your final answer will be just a +9. Now, when you're solving these problems, and you get a problem such as x plus 4, absolute value of x plus 4 equals 17, there's two cases that it could be. Now, looking at this, if this was just a plain x plus 4, or just a plain x equals 17, we'd know it could equal a +17 or a -17. But in this case, this whole value, this whole x plus 4, will equal a positive or -17. So we have to make two cases to solve for each numbers. So we're going to start by saying this x plus 4 could equal a 17. Or the second case, this x plus 4 could equal a -17. Once you do this and split your absolute values, then you're home free. You can use your normal steps of algebra to solve the problem. So it's -4 to both sides, -4 to both sides. And you have x equals 13. And then over here, you have a -4, -4. X equals, and -17 minus 4 is going to be a -21. So the two answers that you could put back into x would be a 13. 13 plus 4 is 17, square absolute value it. And yes, that's 17. Or the other value could be a -21 put back up into x. -21 plus 4 is a -17, absolute value it. It's +17. You're back to your -17. So you need to split it into two cases. The first case is positive. The second case is negative. Now, one thing that's really important is to, before you split into two cases, you have to make sure that the absolute value is the only thing on that side of the equal sign. So when I'm given this problem, I need to make sure that +6 is on the other side. So let's -6 to both sides. -6 to both sides of the equation. That leaves me with a 2w plus 3 absolute value equals, and then what do we have? A minus 4. Now, from here, we would go and split our problem into two cases. However, if you notice, the absolute value equals a negative 4. You might stop and think, well, how could any one item that I absolute value make a negative? In fact, absolute values keep everything positive. There is no way to make something absolute value and have it negative afterwards if there's no other negative signs acting on it. So that means you can stop right there and say there is no value that can go into W, so your answer will be an empty set. Now, if you're ever asked to write an equation, write a formula with absolute values, there is a formula that isn't real easy to remember, but say you're given a problem of an oven and you're trying to cook something at 160 degrees. Your oven actually kicks up a little over 160 degrees. The element turns off. It cools down to a little bit under 160 degrees and then turns back on and repeats that cycle. So if you were asking, write an equation to say what the actual value of the oven is, and could be what's the lowest and highest values, you're going to write it in a formula like this. The x in your variable will be the actual value, because that's what's going to change. You're going to minus your ideal value. What do you really want it to be? And then put that inside absolute values. And remember, the actual value is going to be pretty close to 1 to your ideal value. And that's going to equal the value that you can have plus or minus up and down. So if they say the oven goes up and down 2 degrees, then you want it to equal 2 degrees. So if I put in a value of 162 degrees, 162 minus 160 in absolute values would be just a simple 2. Absolute value of that will equal 2. If I had something lower, like 158 minus 160, you can see that when I absolute value that, that will equal a negative 2. But after absolute valuing it, that will also equal that same plus or minus 2. So this is the formula that you'll want to look at. Thanks again. Hope this helps.